he was deployed to Vietnam, where he served as an F Company 58 Infantry, LRP Airborne, and then in 68 to 69, he served in Lima Company, 75th Rangers. He was a team leader and did long range reconnaissance patrols for the Ranger unit. He received the Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device, and Oak Leaf Cluster, the Army Commendation Medal with V device and Oak Leaf Cluster, Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. But let's give a warm welcome to Ranger Gary.
You all hear me?
Yes, sir.
I spent the last 40 years interviewing Vietnam vets, mainly FERPs and Rangers. I've always considered it an honor to have been one, finest bunch of people I've ever met in my life. It's truly a brotherhood that I'm proud to be a part of. What I want to do today is I want to give you a little bit of a history of the LRRP Rangers in Vietnam based on the research I've done. A lot of you probably are familiar with this. You ladies are probably bored with it, but it's pretty important. There were actually 15 LRRP companies in Vietnam. The Army always says there was 13 accredited LRRP companies, but there were 2 others that didn't get a lot of recognition. The 101st Airborne Division had a bastard battalion that stayed at Phan Thiet. They never did join the division until, I believe it was 1970, when they actually joined up with the rest of the division. They had their own work platoon. They sent people to Recondo School. I was instrumental in getting them accepted for membership in the 75th Ranger Association. Also, the 11th Armored Cat had a work platoon. They trained, did the same kind of missions the rest of us did. The first LRRP unit in Vietnam, thanks to General Westmoreland, began in July 1965. That was the 1st Brigade of the 101st, followed the same month by the 173rd Quadrant Airborne Platoon, which later became a company. Within 6 months, the rest of the divisions, the independent brigades, and the 2 field force units formed LRRP units. Back then, it was LRRP, Long Range Reconnaissance Platoons. In 67, most of them transitioned into Long Range Patrols, LRP. In January of 1969, the 13 sanctioned units became lettered Ranger companies. A through O, with the exception of J, and A and B, which both stayed in the States. I was there when the transition occurred. I went to bed one night as a LRRP. I woke up the next morning, and there were orders posted on our bulletin board that we were now Rangers. So that's how it happened. There was no additional training. We just became Rangers. Our missions didn't change that much. I'd like to say it didn't change. In 70-71, when we were getting ready to withdraw from Vietnam, we suffered a lot of casualties those last 2 years. And the main reason for that is the Army was trying to gear down to withdraw from Vietnam, and they were sending out LRRP teams to operate as companies. They would make contact and maintain contact until reinforced. We suffered a lot of casualties in 70-71. There were roughly 4,900 people that served in the LRRP Ranger units in Vietnam, 4,900 more or less. We lost 362 KIA in Vietnam. So it was less than 1 in 10 did not survive serving the LRRP Ranger Company. It was still pretty dangerous work. Our casualty rate was nowhere near as high as the SOG operators. But a lot of that I attribute to the dedication and support we had. We had good support in Vietnam. Picked up on this. I was amazed at the adaptability of the Long Range Patrol and Ranger units in Vietnam. No 2 units worked alike. Depending on the demographics, where you were located, support from your parent unit, leadership at the high levels, all of that determined how you operated on patrol. In the 101st, when I got there, right after 10, of 68, we were up north, outside of Hue Phu Bai. Almost all of our missions were in the mountains. And I'm talking about steep mountains like North Carolina, that's steep. Water was always a problem for us. You had to get down in the valley to find a stream or a river to resupply yourself with water. Most of the canopy was double and triple canopy jungle, which was really hard to operate in. We did a lot of hill mountain climbing. I'm talking about 1,900 meter high mountains, and most of our rucksacks on a 7-day mission weighed about 120 pounds. We hauled a lot of water with us, that was, including 40 pounds of web gear. So we humped some weight in those mountains. Down south, the 9th Division, they worked in the Delta area. They were in water all the time. I was shocked when I found out that most of their missions were less than a day. I talked to a fellow named Jim Thayer before he passed away. Jim pulled 128 missions in a year's time. I pulled 28 missions in a year's time. Big difference. I asked Jim, I said, how's that possible, Jim? He said, there were days I pulled 2 missions in one day. He said, we hardly ever stayed overnight, and when we did, we went in at night and came out the next day. He said, you couldn't tolerate the water. He said, you get trench foot. Jim also told me that about 6 months into his service, he had tried to chase a couple of VC down, and they got away from him. And he realized that you cannot run a VC with jungle boots on. So Jim started pulling missions barefooted. The only guy I've ever heard did this, but he caught a couple of VC doing that, so it worked. He told me they didn't carry rucksacks in the 9th Division. He said they mainly wore butt packs. They didn't take out a lot of water. They didn't have to. They didn't take out a lot of food because they weren't staying that long. So it was a totally different scenario than the guys that worked up in I Corps or 2 Corps. Every unit had a different type of training. The only commonality in training was Recondo School, which was our leadership school. When I got to the company that I was assigned to, I was assigned to a team, and I trained with that team for 2 weeks in the rear, doing immediate action drills and other kinds of patrolling drills before I was accepted on that team. And our unit, if one guy on the team didn't like you, you got blackballed, and they sent you to an infantry unit. I think most of the LRRP Ranger companies operated that way. You had to trust the other 5 guys on your team, or you didn't like going out. One weak spot on the team degraded that entire unit. As far as I can find out, there were 2 entire teams wiped out during the Vietnam War. All 6 members were killed. One of those was in the 25th Division, and one of those was in my division. The unit that we lost in 1970 had transferred to my unit a week before they were lost from K Company, which was the 4th Infantry Division Rangers. The reason they were lost is that they didn't want to send them out on a mission because they had just arrived in our company, so our company commander sent them out as a radio relay team up near the DMZ for 4 of the teams we had out. Unfortunately, we weren't familiar with the way they trained. As a radio relay team, they spent 3 days in the same spot, right off the main trail. And the last day when they didn't check in the morning, we repelled the team in and found all 6 of them had been killed during the night. They found 2 piles of brass from an AK-47. I'm sure they got triangulated by the NBA and walked around upon them and shot them to death at night. So again, in the 101st, radio relay teams, unless you were on a fire base, you didn't stay in one spot. You moved around because the NBA were quite sophisticated, and they would triangulate your radio transmission, and then you right where you were the second day you were in there. The types of missions, we were supposed to be reconnaissance. When LRRPs were set up, that was our main patrol, was reconnaissance patrol. Over the course of the war, while still LRRPs and later as Rangers, we pulled ambush missions, prisoner snatch missions, bomb damage assessment missions, sensor emplacement missions, POW rescue missions, aircrew recovery missions, radio relay missions, raids, site security, and reaction force. So we acted more as Rangers than we did as LRRPs in Vietnam. There was, as far as I could find out, there was 1 platoon-sized raid during the Vietnam War in the Ashall Valley which was not successful. They went in to ambush trucks at night that were using the floor of the valley, and the next morning, they were set up along this, it was called a dry road bed. And they were set up with a daisy chain claymore ambush, an entire platoon of Americans waiting for those trucks to come by. And 5 NVA came down the trail with mine detectors. And the platoon leader, Lieutenant Sawtell, and the senior NCO stood up to see what was coming, and they were both killed. So it was an unsuccessful raid. That was the largest reaction of a Ranger company I could find out during the Vietnam War. There might be other units that did the same thing, but I couldn't find any. I found out there were some teams that were put on bridge security to guard a bridge or a checkpoint, which was not a work mission, but we had teams that did that kind of stuff. Site security was a team, when the 101st went north, right after Tech, when they set up Camp Eagle, the division commander flew up there on a hilltop with a 12-man LRRP team as his security force. So we were used in a lot of ways that we weren't designed to do. The biggest problem that I determined that happened during the Vietnam War, we had a lot of problems with senior leadership not knowing how to use LRRPs and Rangers. They didn't like us, for one thing. We were too expensive, we required too many assets, and we weren't favorite sons, I'll tell you that. I wrote a lot of missions where we lost people in the past. In my unit, the team leader, he's the one that had that call. And on several of the other LRRP Ranger companies, it was the same way. The team leader made that call. We had times when a colonel flying overhead trying to insert himself in a hot situation, and my company commander actually told a general one time, "Sir, this is my operation. Get off the air." And didn't get in trouble for it, but we appreciate the dedication. The types of insertions that we did, most of them were by helicopter. We had teams that inserted by ladder and inserted by McGuire rig, which is supposed to be the way you could extract it, but we had teams that went in that way also. Repelling, I got to repel on a couple of missions. Pretty exciting doing that. That was another way we inserted, especially if you were in the jungles and the highlands. It was hard to find an LZ a lot of times, and you had to go in by rope. We did truck insertions, boat insertions. There were some teams that inserted by sampan. In other words, we were very adaptable. Keep in mind, we didn't train for this stuff. This is stuff that we were challenged to do for a specific mission, and we did it. I've had a lot of people say, well, you guys went through so much training. We really didn't. Most of it was OJT. A lot of the guys in my unit, we had mechanics, we had MPs, we had signal guys that volunteered for the LRRPs. And they didn't have any infantry training, but they sure the hell acted like they had it. They were good people. We had a lot of Native Americans. We had 8 Native Americans in my unit at one time. And they were all good troops. We did stay behind missions where we go out with an infantry unit. Sometimes we even changed clothes. We would change into tiger fatigues the first night we were there, and the infantry unit would walk off to leave us behind. We did that several times. Pickups, extractions. Usually it was a helicopter coming in and trying to sit down and pick us up. If we couldn't get to an LZ that allowed that, we would come out by ladder, which was always a thrill for the last guy. Nobody would hold the ladder down, so he was pendulum effect going up the ladder. McGuire rigs, stable rigs, which was coming out on a string. We actually had one guy that shot the rope when he was about 60 feet off the ground, and it went down through the jungle, knocked him out, and the helicopter pilot actually landed that aircraft right next to where he fell, and the guys jumped out and picked him up. Recondo school was a finishing school in the LRRPs. That's where we trained our leaders. The policy of Vietnam was when you graduated from Recondo school, you had to have 6 months left in country, or you didn't get to go to Recondo school. That was required. I didn't get to go to Recondo school because I was wounded When I got out of the hospital, I had 5 months left, so I missed my slot. It was an excellent school. They worked on calling in artillery, fire missions, team leadership. It was an excellent school, and most of the guys that came back from it, you could tell they had the finishing training. I'll tell you, I don't like to keep this formal. If anybody's got any questions or any comments they want to make, feel free to do so while I'm speaking. I've written 7 books on Vietnam. My first 2 was my tour of duty. I wrote it as 1 book, and my publisher said it was too large to bring out in 1 book, so I brought it out in 2 books. I didn't do it for the money, because the money's not there. You don't make a lot of money off writing paperbacks. But the first 2 books I did for my kids. I wanted my boys to know what I went through in Vietnam, and I never intended on getting it published. Interesting story. Ken Miller, who wrote Tiger the Alert Dog, which was a novel, was the first book to come out about LRRPs in Vietnam. Ken he called me, he said, "You still working on that thing for your son?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Why don't you send it to me?" I said, "Ken, it's on yellow legal paper." I said, "I had it written." He said, "I've only got about 60 pages. He said, "Send it to me." So I sent it to him in California, and he said, "This is pretty good." He said, "Why don't you write a book to get it published?" I said, "I have no intention on getting it published." He said, "Look, I've got a connection with Owen Locke at Random House, and why don't you just type up a couple of chapters and send him a couple of chapters?" He said, "It'll take him 6 months to read it." And I said, "Okay." So I went and bought an Underwood typewriter manual, and I typed up those first 3 chapters. And one of them was that November 20th mission I was on. The other one was on a mission I got hit by lightning. So I typed up those 2 chapters and sent them to Ken. He passed them on to Owen Locke, and that was on Friday. And on Tuesday, I get a call, and the guy says, "Gary, this is Owen Locke." And I said, "Who?" He said, "Owen Locke." I said, "Who the hell's Owen Locke?" And he said, "I'm the publisher at Random House." I said, "Miller, are you shitting me? Is this a joke?" He said, "I'm Owen Locke." He said, "I want to buy your books. Send me the rest of it." Well, I didn't have the rest of it even written. So I told him that. I said, "Look," I said, I did 2 chapters. I said, "The rest of it's on yellow legal paper." He said, "Well, send me that." So I sent it to him, and he called me back a week later, and he said, "We got a problem." I said, "Well, that figures." And he said, "You got way too much here for 1 book." He said, "We'll make 2 books out of it." So he gave me 6 months to finish those 2 books. Which I did, and they came out, and I was amazed at the phone calls that I got from people from other LRRP Ranger companies that said, "We appreciate you writing those books." And so we never could tell people what we did in Vietnam. So that impressed me. I got over 5,000 letters and phone calls the first 6 months those books were out. I decided a year later that I told my story. I wanted to tell a story about my company. So I called Ken Miller and Ray Martinez. Ken was one of 2 people that served in all 3 phases of the 101st North Rangers. He was there for 3 years and served in LRRP, LRP, and Rangers. I said, "Ken, let's collaborate and write 3 books on the different phases of our unit." So Ray Martinez wrote the 1st Brigade part of it. Ken Miller wrote the F-58 part, and I wrote the L-75th part. It came out in a series called 6 Silent Men, books 1, 2, and 3, and they did pretty well. Well, after I did that, I had a couple of guys call me and say, "How come L Company's getting all this publicity? Why don't you write a book about the other units?" I thought, "Well, how am I going to write 12 more books?" So I said, "Well, I'll do a series of books about missions from each of the LRRP Ranger companies that were in Vietnam," which became the 2 Phantom Warriors books. After that, I decided my writing career was over because I really didn't enjoy writing. And I had Ray Martinez call me, I guess it was 2 years ago. You all know who David Dolby is? He was a Medal of Honor recipient in the Eye of Grain with the 1st Cav. Dave, after he got his Medal of Honor, President Johnson asked him, he said, "Son, what can I do for you now?" He said, "Sir, you can send me back to Vietnam." And Johnson said, "There's no way we can do that." So I don't know how Dave did it, but he pulled 5 more tours in Vietnam, all combat tours, after he got his Medal of Honor. Dave was a friend of mine and a friend of Ray Martinez's. and he passed away about 6 years ago. Ray had promised him that he would write Dave's story, and he was actually working on it when Dave died. So Ray called me and he said, "You still got some pull with some publishers?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Let's collaborate on a book about Dave Dolby, how he got his Medal of Honor." Dave went on to serve in Charlie Company Rangers after he served in the infantry with the CAV. Matter of fact, he tried to, that's where he met Ray Martinez. He tried to get in the 1st Brigade LRRPs in the 101st, and our Sergeant Major said, "There's no way we can get you in. Your records are red flag. You can't serve in the combat unit." Well, somehow or another, Dave served the rest of that tour with the 101st Infantry units. Then he came back and served with Charlie Company Rangers. He served a year with Project Phoenix, and he served a year as an advisor to the Army Rangers, all combat tours. We collaborated on the book. It's mainly about his Medal of Honor, what he did to get that. And Dave was a hell of a warrior. He was the kind of warrior that Achilles and Ajax and the old Greeks had. I mean, he liked killing people. He liked war. And he was good at lives and the guys. So I'm inviting you guys. I know you're Rangers. I am too. But we were LRRPs before we were Rangers. And you guys trained as LRRPs. So I know you consider yourselves Rangers. You can be both. I was inducted into the Ranger Hall of Fame in 2016. I'm sure because of the books, not because of my military record. Well, I'm finished. No questions?
Gary, we appreciate you sharing your history with us and of the Rangers. And a little token of our appreciation, we're going to give you 2 of our coins.
I appreciate that.
Okay? And one is the Alpha Company coin. And we're not going to coin check you. And we have the coin from Germany all the way to the 1st Cav. So we, this event.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Another round of applause.